Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Caroline. Happy June. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in April and the books that I read in May. April was not a great reading month for me. I only read 2 books, but then I came into May and for some reason, May felt so long. Like May felt like how January normally does, where it just goes on forever and ever and ever. But I ended up reading a ton in May and I read 7 books. So I think I pretty much made up for the lack of books I read in April with the books I read in May, which was awesome. Without further ado, I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in April and May. Okay, so I started April off by reading The Outliers, or I guess it's just Outliers, by Malcolm Gladwell. This is a nonfiction book about success and about all these different successful people, and Gladwell is kind of just talking about all the different components that can contribute whether someone's successful or not. And it's actually a really interesting read. I have notes in it. I was expecting not to like this, but it was actually pretty interesting. I did have to listen to the audiobook for a majority of it because I am not the biggest nonfiction person, but I did find some of the anecdotes interesting. I did not give this a rating just because I rarely rate nonfiction. I never really rate memoirs, and I just didn't really have a good rating for this. For some reason, I find it so much easier to rate fiction than nonfiction. But I did have to read it for school, so I definitely would not have picked this book up if I wasn't reading it for school, and I might not have finished it if I wasn't reading it for school. Overall, I think it was good. It definitely got me thinking, and it also, if you're someone who gets wound up about oh, I'm not as successful as I should be, in a way, I think it can be comforting in that success, which everyone defines it differently, so many random things can contribute to it that it's not your fault. One of the examples he gives is he's talking about professional hockey players and how even something as mundane as what month they were born can literally make an impact on whether they become a pro hockey player or not, which is crazy to think about. But it's definitely an interesting read. Okay, so then the next book that I read in April was I'll Give You the Sun, which was a huge success. I'll Give You the Sun is a YA novel about these 2 twins, Noah and Jude, and they're super close. And it basically is an alternating timeline where it goes from when they're 14 and they're close to when they're 16 and they barely talk to each other. So you get Jude's perspective when they're 16, and then you get Noah's perspective when they're 14. And it's basically just a novel about love, loss, siblings, family. There's a few kind of mystery elements, I suppose, that you kind of figure out. But I think the main theme is about really family and about their relationship. I unexpectedly loved this book so much. I kind of thought this might be a 3-star read, but I ended up rating it 4.25 stars. I really liked this. I literally highlighted so much. Noah is definitely my favorite character. I love him, and he's so sweet, and I love the way, I loved how the author shifted her writing from when she's writing as Noah and then to when she's writing as Jude. She literally shifted her writing so you feel like you're more in that character's shoes, and it was incredible. Okay, those were the 2 books that I read in April, so now we're on to May. The first book that I read in May was Reckless, so I will pop up a picture here. Reckless is it the 3rd book? Is it the 4th? Let me see. Reckless is in the Chestnut Spring series. Oh, okay. Reckless is the 4th book in the Chestnut Spring series, which overall the series is a bunch of cowboy romances. And Chestnut Spring and Reckless is between Theo Silva, who's a bull rider, and then Winter Hamilton, who's a doctor. And you meet both of them in the first book, which is Flawless, which is so far my favorite. But basically it's a cowboy romance between the 2. And I'm not sure how much I can say without spoiling it, because there's a lot of stuff that happens in this book, and I'm not sure if you know that going in, especially if you're reading it, because I think you can read them as standalones. So I'm not going to say too much about the plot, but I rated this a 3 stars. I enjoyed it. I liked Theo a lot, and I liked the bull riding trope, but there was like kind of the miscommunication trope present in this book, which is not my favorite, and it felt like a really big element in this book, and I just did not like that. So beware, but I did like it. I will continue the Chestnut Springs series. I love this series. I love this world. The found family aspect is amazing. So overall, I liked it. I will definitely continue this series. After I read Reckless, I read A Long Way Gone by Ishmael Bea. This is a nonfiction book. They are the memoirs of a boy soldier. Ishmael was a boy soldier in Sierra Leone, I believe. Yes, during the rebel attacks in Africa. And this is pretty much just a memoir of his childhood a little bit, but really like what went on with the rebel attacks and how he became a boy soldier. And then a good chunk of the book is his time after being a boy soldier. He's rehabilitated and he comes to the US. I did not rate this book because I don't really rate memoirs anymore, but I did like it. It really hurt to read because when you're reading like a dark or a sad book, you can always remind yourself like, oh, it's fiction, it's not real. But this is nonfiction, and this was his life, and this was so many people's lives. And so it's a really dark read. I would definitely check trigger warnings because there are some like brutal descriptions in here of violence. But overall, I'm really glad I read it. It gave me a new perspective that I didn't have, which I love because every single memoir I read gives me a new perspective. And it's also weird to think of like this is a kid. Like he was like 12 when he became a boy soldier. So it's crazy to think about someone younger than you like fighting in a war. And going through all these traumatic events. So I think it's a good read for anyone. Very informational. Then I read Then She Was Gone by Lisa Jewell. Everyone is always talking about Lisa Jewell, how dark and twisted her novels are, and I finally picked Then She Was Gone up. Then She Was Gone is about this girl named Ellie. She's a 15-year-old, and she goes missing one day. Never see her again. And you're pretty much following Ellie's mom for most of the book. And her name is Laurel. And Laurel loved Ellie. Ellie was her whole world. So a lot changed in her life after Ellie went missing. A lot changed when Ellie went missing, including Laurel got divorced with her husband, with Ellie's dad. So years pass. I believe a decade passes. And Laurel meets Floyd. Floyd is this charming man who she meets in a cafe. And she starts falling for him, and she meets his daughter. His daughter's name is Poppy, and his daughter eerily reminds her of Ellie, but it's probably just in her head, right? That's all I'll say. That's pretty much all the back says. I really liked this book. I'm gonna be honest, a lot of it, it's not really a plot twisty book, but there are things that pop up before and then you kind of like figure them out at the end, and I could kind of call most of them because I felt like a lot of them were obvious. So in that element I was a little bit disappointed because there wasn't anything at the end where I was like shocked or like taken aback. But I did read this so quickly because it is so creepy. Like her writing style is so creepy and just keeps you invested, and so I think I read this in like 3 or 4 days. I think I rated this a 4 stars. So I liked it. I would recommend it. I will say it is a little creepy. Like if you have a 15-year-old daughter, maybe don't read this book because they do talk about trauma and they do talk about, violence, and someone going missing. But I'm really excited because I want to read her other book, which is called None of This Is True. I'm sure she has many books, but that's the one that I've heard a lot about. So I think I'll read None of This Is True next from her. Next, I read Expiration Dates. Expiration Dates is by Rebecca Searle. Rebecca Searle writes, I think, only literary fiction, and she wrote One Italian Summer and In 5 Years. In 5 Years is a 5-star read for me. I love In 5 Years. And I did enjoy One Italian Summer. So Rebecca Searle is definitely an auto-buy author for me. So when I saw she had a new book, I had to buy it. Expiration Dates is about Daphne. She is, I think, like 30 maybe, but basically for her entire life, whenever she's about to date a man, she's gotten a letter and it said the name of the man and then how long she would date them. So even from back when she was in like middle school, it'd be like Tom, 5 weeks or something like that. So she's always known when her relationships were going to end. But one day she gets a note and there's no time limit. So it's just a name. So that can only imply that she'll be with them forever, right? So that is the setup for the book. I really enjoyed it. It's very much, I've noticed with Rebecca Searle's writing is she loves to write about atmosphere. In 5 years, it's so like viscerally New York, and she can really describe that really well. And then One Italian Summer, half of that book is just like descriptions of these places in Italy. And this one is set in LA. And so it very much talks about all these restaurants in LA, like the coast, and it talks a lot about LA, which I think is really cool. I just liked this book. It talks about romantic love, which Rebecca Searle in the past, most of her books are about relationships, but none really about romantic love. And so I feel like this was her first big like romantic love literary fiction book, and I really, really enjoyed that. So I liked it. Her writing is beautiful. I underlined a ton, per usual. And I even cried at the end, which Rebecca Searle always gets me with the tears. But I have a video, if you haven't seen my short that I posted of what I read in a week, I was reading this and I cried at the end. I rated this 4 stars. Okay, next I read ACOTAR, the first book, A Court of Thorns and Roses. I am so excited that I finally read this. I've wanted to read it for years and I finally picked it up, and I just filmed a reading vlog of it, so if you haven't seen that, go check that out. A Court of Thorns and Roses is about Feyre. Correct me if I'm saying that wrong, because I like looked up the pronunciation and I think this is how you say it. It's like Feyre. But Feyre is immortal, and she lives kind of like how Katniss lives in the Hunger Games. She lives very poor, and she's the one solely keeping up her family. Her dad hurt his leg and he can't go out and hunt, can't work. And then her 2 sisters are pretty lazy, they don't do much. So she's the one that's solely responsible for keeping the family fed. So one day she's out in the woods, she's hunting, and she sees a wolf who's about to eat the deer that she was trying to shoot. So she shoots the deer and the wolf. She shoots the wolf before she shoots the deer and brings it home. She sells the wolf's hide, I believe. She sells the wolf's hide, and then she gets a knock on her door, and apparently the wolf was a fairy, which not, when I say fairy, I think it's pronounced fairy. When I say fairy, it's not like Tinkerbell, it's like these beasts that are like, that live across the land that were terrible to the mortals, that they don't talk to at all, and they're these terrible beasts. So apparently the wolf was a fairy that she killed. So now the fairies have come to her house to kill her or to take her prisoner. So they take her prisoner, and now she's in like the fairyland and she's kind of trapped as a prisoner. So that is the setup. That is what happens in like the first bit of the book. I enjoyed this book. I rated it a 3.75. So it wasn't like my favorite read of the month, but I definitely will continue the series. The only reason that I didn't like it at times is because there were times where there was like a lot of action, or where there's a lot of kind of explanations, and those are the parts in fantasy books that aren't my favorite. I very much cling to the romance in all fantasy books that I read, but I did like the concept, and I liked the dialogue, I liked all the characters, their different dynamics, and I thought that was really interesting. And then we meet a character in this book who shows up in the other books, who the entire ACOTAR fan base is overall very obsessed with. And I think he's going to be really prominent in the second book. So as soon as I finished this book, I was like, I literally ordered the second, and the second is sitting on my floor right now, because the ending was so good, and it was very, like, it wasn't a cliffhanger, but they left you with some things that need to continue. It was clear there'd be a second. Next, I read Magnolia Parks, which has also been on my shelf for a bit, and I've been very excited to read. Magnolia Parks is about Magnolia Parks and BJ Ballantyne. They've known each other since they were kids, and they live in high society London, and they're both really rich, and they've always kind of had like a back and forth relationship ever since they broke up 3 years ago. They both love each other, but they know they can't be together, and it's just this impossible thing, like impossible relationship. They very much remind me of Lily and Lo in a way. If you've read the Addicted to You series, they kind of have some similarities, I think. But overall, they're really, really cute, and I really liked them. I rated this book also a 3.75, like ACOTAR, just because the ending kind of disappointed me. I will say I was surprised by the ending, and I didn't see that coming. But in the end, I was like a little disappointed because it felt like there were so many things unresolved. But I do like the characters. I like the found family. There's a really great found family element because a lot of their parents like have kind of disregarded them. They've gone to boarding school, they've been sent away. And so they've found this family like between all these like 20-year-olds and like the kids that they went to school with. And I really liked that. And so I bought the second. I'm currently reading the second, which is Daisy Hates, who is a character in this book. And I'm excited to continue the series. I am excited to read Daisy Hates, but I also just want to get back to like Magnolia and BJ. So I think there's either 4 or 5 books in this series, and I think they come back to Magnolia and BJ. So I'm excited to read more from them. Last but certainly not least, I listened to the audiobook of The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. I listened to this like kind of throughout the entire month of May. Woman in Me is basically about Britney's life. She touches on her childhood a bit, but it mostly is about like kind of her relationship with Justin Timberlake. It's pretty much just about her life, like kind of how she became who she is, and then a lot about the conservatorship, which was really interesting. And I really appreciated hearing her story because something she mentions in the book is how many people wrote memoirs about her and mentioned her. Like her mom wrote a memoir, her sister wrote a memoir. All these people made like documentaries about her, but she never got to speak for herself and speak about her own experience. And so I'm really grateful for her, and I'm glad that she's finally gotten to do that. So I enjoyed hearing her story. I've really enjoyed reading memoirs recently. My voice is getting like all funny. It wasn't my favorite memoir that I've read because I felt like there were at some points where she kind of repeated herself. But overall, I really enjoyed hearing her story, and I learned a lot more about her life that I didn't know. So those are the 7 books that I read in May and the 2 books that I read in April. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope, while I was editing this, it got cut down a bit so it's not 30 minutes long. But comment down below what y'all read in May and what books you're gonna read this June. Bye!